all of this is being supported by the British royal family as part of Operation Thaw.
Why have they flown a Press Association journalist and photographer from the UK over to Australia to cover this fake royal tour?
The narrative around Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is shifting again, and this time critics say it's more calculated than ever. What looked, on the surface, like a simple overseas visit to Australia is now being described by royal watchers as something far more strategic. Not a holiday, not even just a charity trip, but a carefully staged performance, one designed to mimic the structure, optics, and global impact of an official royal tour. And that's where the controversy begins, because according to critics, this wasn't just about visibility, it was about rewriting the rules.
And little wonder why Harry and Meghan chose now for their latest cosplaying sham royal tour.
During their time in Australia, Harry and Meghan followed a strikingly familiar pattern. Hospital visits, meetings with vulnerable communities, public walkabouts, photo opportunities with crowds, and tightly controlled media coverage. The kind of schedule that, for decades, has defined how the royal family presents itself on the world stage. Except there's one key difference. They are no longer working royals.
Harry never wanted to be a working royal, all right? He didn't want it. Yeah, he did. He wants it so badly. That is why he cannot breathe without a camera by him.
And yet, critics argue everything about this tour suggested otherwise. From the presence of UK-based media crews to the highly curated imagery being distributed globally, many are now questioning whether this was an attempt to recreate royal status without royal accountability. Some experts believe the couple are trying to position themselves as a parallel monarchy, operating outside the institution, but still benefiting from its legacy, symbolism, and global recognition. And if that sounds dramatic, the reaction online has been even more intense. Because for many observers, this isn't just about optics, it's about intent.
First of all, you can't unroyal Harry, even if you brouhaha.
It just unrolled Andrew.
2 seconds. Yeah, that was it. By the way, Piers, that was really uncomfortable when you were sitting there Neanderthal style, placing Harry in the same bracket as Andrew.
There's a growing belief among critics that Harry, in particular, is testing the waters for a return, not necessarily as a full-time royal, but in a hybrid role that allows him to maintain independence while still carrying royal influence, a model that notably was rejected back in 2020. At the time, the idea of being half in, half out was firmly shut down by the palace. The message was clear: you're either a working royal or you're not. But now, some commentators are asking, is that line being quietly challenged? Because what we're seeing looks very different from the couple's early post-royal years.
The Sussexes are down under and they're taking a reporter and a photographer with them to document the high-profile trip. Okay, you only take a reporter and a photographer with you when you are tightly trying to control the narrative.
Back then, their focus was on stepping away, building a new life, creating distance. Now, it's global tours, public engagements, media visibility, structured appearances that mirror the very system they left behind. And critics say that's not a coincidence. They argue this is a rebrand, one that leans heavily on royal aesthetics while avoiding royal constraints. But perhaps the most controversial claim goes even further. Some believe this entire tour was a dress rehearsal, a test run, not for another overseas visit, but for something much closer to home, the United Kingdom.
They know that they were never meant to be half in, half out. It was not allowed. They have gone out of their way to exploit their links to the royal family.
Because with the upcoming Invictus Games event scheduled in Birmingham, there is increasing speculation that Harry could return to the UK in a much more visible public-facing role. And according to critics, the timing is not accidental. The monarchy, led by King Charles III, has faced a series of challenges in recent years, from internal tensions to ongoing public scrutiny. Add to that the lingering shadow of controversies surrounding Prince Andrew, and some commentators argue that the institution is in a period of reputational strain, which raises a provocative question.
She said, call me Meg. She didn't even demand to be introduced as Duchess.
Great.
And still,
let's
you have
call
a go
her
at the
Meg.
titles.
Let's quit the Duchess bullshit.
Okay, well, that's what she wants. Hi, Meg.
Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. No, I'm from Sussex. Piss off.
Do Harry and Meghan see an opportunity? Critics suggest that the couple may believe they can step back into relevance, not by formally rejoining the royal family, but by presenting themselves as a modern, global extension of it. A version that appeals to younger audiences, international audiences, media audiences, and crucially, one that operates on their own terms. But not everyone is convinced. In fact, many critics see this as deeply problematic, because while the couple often emphasize their independence, their projects, and their personal brand, moments like the Australia tour seem to rely heavily on the very royal associations they claim to have moved beyond.
You only do that when this is a royal tour. This is exactly how the royal family operate when they are going overseas, when they have engagements even within the UK.
And that contradiction hasn't gone unnoticed. There are also growing concerns about the way these appearances are being staged. The use of photographers, the selection of locations, the timing of engagements, all of it, critics say, points to a highly controlled narrative. Not spontaneous, not organic, engineered. And that brings us to one of the most debated aspects of this entire situation: media influence. Some commentators argue that Harry and Meghan have become exceptionally skilled at shaping how their story is told. Not necessarily through direct control, but through access, exclusivity, and strategic visibility. Others go further, suggesting that parts of the mainstream media have become unusually favorable, raising questions about objectivity and balance.
Harry and Andrew in two very different categories, and I don't think you can put them in here. But there's one common thing that they both do, and that is damage the monarchy.
Right.
And that is what we're seeing, I think,
That's my point.
and I think that's what we're seeing in this tour.
However, it's important to note that these claims remain highly contested. What is clear, though, is that the couple continues to dominate headlines, and that in itself is part of the strategy. Because in today's media landscape, attention is power, visibility is currency, and narrative is everything. So whether this was a genuine charitable visit, a calculated PR move, or something in between, one thing is undeniable. People are watching closely. And as the next chapter approaches, with potential UK appearances on the horizon, the stakes are only getting higher. Because if this really was a dress rehearsal, as some critics suggest, then the main event is still to come.
All of the optics pointed very heavily towards the fact that the palace were behind this. They had all of the Royal Rota photographers there. They had key high-profile journalists that work like this with the palace, whereby they are on the palace's side. They aren't going to give the media bad images of any of the royals. It is shot and covered in a way that is, let's say, establishment approved.
The more closely you examine what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle actually did in Australia, the harder it becomes to dismiss this as just another overseas visit. Critics aren't just reacting emotionally anymore. They're pointing to very specific details, patterns, and decisions that suggest something far more deliberate was happening behind the scenes. Let's start with the structure of the trip itself. Over the course of just a few days, the couple moved across multiple major cities, including Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra. That alone is significant. This wasn't a single event appearance or a one-off speaking engagement.
They could be living the most incredible life. They could be having their foundation, doing their charity work, living in a mortgage-free house, and having a life of service, which they always claimed they wanted to do.
It was a tightly scheduled, multi-stop itinerary, the kind typically associated with official royal tours, where maximum exposure is the goal. And then there's the type of engagements they chose. They visited a children's hospital. They spent time at a women's refuge. They appeared at events connected to mental health initiatives. They attended public-facing activities where crowds could gather, take photos, and interact with them directly. These are not random choices. These are the exact categories of appearances that working members of the royal family have historically prioritized: healthcare, vulnerable communities, veterans, and public morale.
What is this tour? I don't understand what it is, because I've done many of these royal tours, and apart from, I was saying to Joe in the makeup room, apart from unveiling a plaque or planting a tree, this looks like a royal tour. And yet, at the weekend, they are going to be coining it in, and that's where I have a massive problem with this.
Critics say that alignment is too precise to ignore. Another detail that's raising eyebrows is the presence of British media on the ground. A reporter and photographer from a major UK press agency were flown in to cover the trip. That's not standard for a private visit. Typically, international press will pick up stories locally or use wire services already in place. Flying in specific UK media suggests something else: a desire to control not just the message, but the imagery that gets distributed globally. And that matters, because those images, Meghan interacting with children, Harry speaking with veterans, both of them framed against recognizable Australian landmarks, are now circulating worldwide. They shape perception. They reinforce a particular narrative, that the couple is still operating on a global, almost diplomatic level.
The visit to the Children's Hospital, highly publicized. That's Meghan ripping something right out of Diana's playbook. Serving homeless women the other day, wearing Diana's $26,000 Cartier watch, wearing a Christian Dior tailored suit.
Critics argue that this is exactly the point. There's also the question of branding. During the trip, Meghan was reportedly engaging in meetings connected to her business ventures, including potential partnerships and supply chain discussions. That's a commercial layer sitting alongside charitable appearances. For critics, this overlap is controversial. Royal tours traditionally are strictly separated from personal commercial interests. Mixing the two, even indirectly, is seen as crossing a line that the monarchy itself has always tried to maintain. Then there's the timeline. This tour didn't happen in isolation. It comes at a moment when Harry is expected to return to the UK in connection with the upcoming Invictus Games event scheduled in Birmingham. That's not speculation. It's a confirmed future engagement tied directly to a project he founded and continues to lead.
These optics, the access to things like the World Health Organization when they went to Jordan, meeting with members of the royal fold in Jordan, going to Ukraine for Invictus, Australia, getting the mass optics that are kind of sending out like ding, 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 royal tour. This is the palace that are working behind the scenes to do this, in my opinion.
What critics are connecting is the sequence. Australia first, a high-visibility, structured, globally covered trip. Then, the UK, a major event with international attention, strong charitable backing, and a direct link to Harry's legacy within the royal sphere. Seen together, it creates a narrative arc. And critics believe that arc is intentional. There are also specific moments from the tour that have drawn scrutiny. At the hospital visit, for example, images showed close interactions with little ones, some of whom are understood to be immunocompromised. Critics questioned whether appropriate precautions were taken, particularly given that long-haul travel increases exposure risks.
Let's not forget, the Tom Bower book was an absolute nightmare for the palace and for Harry and Meghan. That was never supposed to happen. So it's interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, Tom Bower is evaporated. Has anyone seen him? Can we check if Tom Bower is okay? He's been pushed right down the news agenda. We've then got Markle markling everyone, and dominating the news agenda with pictures of her and poorly children, women's refuge. This is exactly like when Prince Harry came back in September and knowing he would get, I believe, criticism quite rightly. It was the bulletproof narrative.
While no official issues were reported, the concern itself has become part of the broader conversation, whether optics were prioritized over caution. Another point raised relates to crowd management. Footage from several appearances shows highly organized environments, controlled access points, positioned spectators, clear sightlines for cameras. This level of organization typically requires coordination with local authorities and event planners. Again, not unusual for high-profile figures, but critics note that it mirrors the infrastructure usually reserved for official state or royal visits. Then there's the messaging. During the tour, both Harry and Meghan emphasized themes they've spoken about repeatedly in recent years: mental health, resilience, public scrutiny. Meghan, in particular, has previously described herself as one of the most heavily targeted individuals online. That narrative resurfaced during public discussions, reinforcing a storyline that has been central to their post-royal identity.
How are Harry and Meghan representing this country right now? Okay, we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis and a fuel crisis here right now, and we are supposed to fork out money for these two on a quasi-royal tour when they are no longer working royals.
Critics argue that this repetition is strategic. By tying current appearances to past narratives, they maintain continuity. They remind audiences of their struggles while presenting themselves as active, visible, and engaged. It's a combination that keeps both sympathy and attention in play, but not everyone is convinced that this approach is effective long-term. Some commentators point out that public patience can wear thin when the same themes are revisited without clear resolution. Others argue that the contrast between claims of wanting privacy and highly visible international tours creates a disconnect that audiences notice. There's also renewed focus on Harry's own statements. In previous interviews, he has spoken about not wanting the kind of life that came with being a full-time working royal, referencing the pressures faced by his mother.
And now that they're doing some of these little pop-up charity PR opportunities, because they're certainly not royal engagements, it's harder to criticize them because the photographs that will be shown as we're criticizing them are them with small children that are ill.
Yet critics now highlight the contradiction between those statements and his current level of public exposure. Frequent appearances, global travel, and media engagement suggest a continued reliance on the very system he once criticized. That contradiction has become a key talking point. Another factor adding complexity is the role of media partnerships. Over the past few years, Harry and Meghan have signed deals with major platforms, including streaming services and publishing houses. While some of those projects have already been released, others remain in development. Critics suggest that maintaining high visibility through tours like Australia helps sustain interest in those ventures, keeping their profile elevated between major releases. It's a cycle. Appearances drive attention.
If you're driven by service, you do it day in, day out. But they only want to do it, don't they, when there's hundreds of people that can be photographed, cheering them on, or a branding board, or an incredibly poorly brave little girl that's holding up a sign. When I saw that, I thought that must have been so daunting for that little girl.
Attention supports projects. Projects reinforce relevance. And relevance, in turn, justifies more appearances. The Australia tour fits neatly into that cycle. Then, there's the reaction within the UK. While public opinion remains divided, there is a noticeable segment of commentators who view this kind of activity as an attempt to re-enter the royal conversation without formally rejoining the institution. The idea of a part-time role, once dismissed, is being discussed again, not as an official proposal, but as a possibility that some believe Harry may still be pursuing. No confirmation exists, but the discussion itself is significant, because it shows that the line between in and out is no longer as clear in public perception as it once was. And that ambiguity benefits the couple. It allows them to operate in a space where they can draw on royal associations when it suits them, while maintaining independence when it doesn't.
Consistently grifty behaviour. This is a woman that has never once taken accountability for anything she has done.
Critics say that flexibility is precisely what makes their current position so controversial. It challenges established norms. It raises questions about fairness, consistency, and accountability. And it forces the monarchy, whether it responds or not, to coexist with a parallel narrative playing out on the global stage. As for what comes next, the facts point to one thing: visibility isn't decreasing. With the Invictus Games event approaching in Birmingham, Harry is set to step back into the UK spotlight. That will bring renewed media attention, renewed public scrutiny, and likely renewed debate about his relationship with the royal family. Whether Meghan joins him remains to be seen. But if the Australia tour is any indication, critics expect a continuation of the same strategy.
What about those children? They are immunocompromised. Harry and Meghan have just got off of a plane and they are ultimately putting those children at risk. The fault also lies with the hospital. This was a crazy move and it's all about optics for everyone, and this is unforgivable.
Structured appearances, controlled messaging, and high-impact visuals designed to dominate coverage. Because at this point, the pattern is clear. This isn't random, it isn't accidental. It's consistent, repeatable, and built on recognizable elements. And that's why critics are paying attention to the details. Not just what Harry and Meghan say, but what they do, where they go, who they meet, how it's filmed, how it's distributed. Because in those details, they believe the real story is being told. When you strip away the headlines and look closely at what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle actually did during their Australia visit, a very specific pattern starts to emerge. And it's that pattern critics are focusing on. This wasn't a loosely planned trip, it was structured. Over roughly 4 days, the couple moved between Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra, hitting multiple high-visibility engagements in a compressed time frame.
We're two people who have caused intense damage to the reputation of the royal family and the institution of the monarchy, are now running a kind of renegade, rival royal family, engaging in rival tours and going to places like Australia, and that can only be ultimately more damaging for the actual royal family.
That alone mirrors how official royal tours are organized. Short, intense schedules designed to generate maximum media output in minimal time. Now look at the exact locations they chose. One of the central stops was a children's hospital. That's significant because hospital visits are one of the most traditional elements of royal engagements. They provide emotional imagery, direct interaction, and strong media coverage. Photos from that visit show Meghan sitting with little ones, speaking with families, and engaging closely with patients. Another stop was a women's refuge. Again, this is not random. Women's shelters and community support organizations are often included in royal itineraries because they align with themes of social impact and advocacy. During this visit, the couple were photographed serving food, speaking with staff, and interacting with residents, all moments that translate easily into positive press coverage.
We saw these Royal Rota journalists and these Royal Rota photographers and all of the establishment media start to work with Harry and Meghan.
They also attended events linked to mental health and community well-being. This is consistent with Harry's long-term focus on mental health initiatives, including his involvement in the Invictus Games. But what stands out is how these engagements were scheduled alongside the more visual, public-facing visits, creating a mix of substance and optics. Then there's the presence of sport and public events. In Sydney, they were seen at locations near the harbor, including activities that placed them in open, highly photogenic environments. These are the kinds of settings where large crowds can gather and where images can be captured with strong visual appeal. Landmarks, open space, recognizable backdrops. Critics say this combination, hospitals, community centers, public landmarks, follows a very specific formula. It's the same formula used by the royal family to balance seriousness with accessibility. But the logistics are what raise further questions.
This was not a tour. Rather, a series of private business meetings looking at potential supply partners and chains for Meghan's as ever brand with not much media. The supply chains. You had Netflix as a supply chain, Meghan Markle, and you, apparently according to your own testimony, thought they couldn't scale up your brand.
A UK-based press photographer and reporter were flown out specifically to cover the trip. This is not standard practice for private individuals. Normally, local media or international wire services handle coverage. Bringing in your own press team suggests a deliberate effort to control how events are documented. And control matters, because the images that come out of these events are what shape global perception. In this case, those images were consistent. Close-up interactions, smiling crowds, carefully framed shots that emphasize connection and engagement. There's also evidence of coordination at each stop. Crowd placement, security presence, timed arrivals, all of these indicate that local organizers were working to ensure the events ran smoothly and were camera-ready.
There is a go-to playbook move in PR. And when you are trying to deflect from negative coverage, when you are trying to shame people into not asking questions, you hide behind philanthropy.
That level of coordination doesn't happen spontaneously. It requires planning between multiple parties, including event hosts and security teams. Critics argue that this level of organization moves the trip beyond casual or private. It becomes something more formal in execution, even if not in official status. Another detail that's been highlighted is the messaging during these appearances. Meghan has previously spoken about online harassment and public scrutiny, describing herself as heavily targeted. During this trip, similar themes were referenced again, particularly in discussions around mental health. That continuity suggests that their public messaging is being carefully maintained across different appearances. Harry, on the other hand, continues to tie his public role to veterans and the Invictus Games. And this is where timing becomes critical. The next Invictus Games event is scheduled to take place in Birmingham. That's confirmed.
I cannot stand the fact that this woman and Harry are parading around Australia in what I believe is very much an entitled tour.
It's also expected to draw international attention, political figures, and media coverage. Harry's involvement is central. He founded the initiative and remains its most recognizable figure. So when critics look at the Australia trip, they don't just see isolated events. They see a lead-up, a sequence. Australia builds visibility. Birmingham becomes the next stage. And that sequence is what fuels speculation about a potential UK re-entry, not necessarily as a formal working royal, but as a high-profile public figure operating in similar spaces.
The mainstream media can no longer be trusted.
There's also the commercial aspect. Reports indicate that Meghan used parts of the trip to explore business-related opportunities, including discussions tied to her brand. While details are limited, the fact that business meetings were happening alongside charitable visits has drawn criticism. Traditionally, royal engagements are kept separate from personal commercial activity. Blending the two introduces questions about intent, whether appearances are purely charitable or also serve brand-building purposes. That overlap is one of the most debated aspects of this entire situation. Then there's the historical context. Back in 2020, the idea of Harry and Meghan having a half-in, half-out role was rejected. They stepped away from official duties, relocated, and began building independent careers.
The point remains, Harry and the palace, I believe, are absolutely milking these vulnerable moments.
At the time, the boundary seemed clear. But what critics are now pointing out is that the current model, global tours, structured engagements, media coverage, starts to resemble a version of that previously rejected arrangement. Not officially, but functionally. And that's where the tension lies, because while they are not representing the monarchy, their activities still draw heavily on the recognition and credibility that comes from their royal titles. Another point being raised is public reception. Footage from Australia shows mixed reactions. In some locations, crowds gathered, took photos, and engaged enthusiastically. In others, the response appeared more subdued.
He is obsessed with fame. He literally, it's like the oxygen for him. I'm starting to think he's the male Kim Kardashian without the boobs and the bum.
Polling data from local outlets suggested that a significant portion of the public felt the visit did not change their overall opinion of the couple. That's important, because it indicates that while the tour generated visibility, it didn't necessarily shift sentiment in a clear direction. And that brings us back to impact. What did this trip actually achieve? From a factual standpoint, it achieved several things. It generated global media coverage. It reinforced Harry's association with veterans and mental health. It positioned Meghan within both charitable and business contexts. It created a series of high-quality images and narratives that can be used across platforms. But whether it improved their standing, that's less clear. Critics argue that the visibility may come at the cost of increased scrutiny, because the more structured and polished these appearances become, the more people start to compare them directly to official royal tours. And that comparison is difficult to avoid, especially when the elements, locations, scheduling, media presence are so similar. Looking ahead, all of this feeds into what happens next in the UK.
GB News has even been captured by Harry and Meghan Markle. And I've done it in a few ways. There was a meeting with a billionaire who Meghan was close to, who had some links to one of the billionaires who run GB News. So that shows you how they do it on like a very deep state type level.
With Birmingham on the horizon and Harry's confirmed involvement in the Invictus Games, there will be another opportunity for high-profile appearances, another chance to observe how he positions himself publicly, and potentially another moment where the lines between former royal, independent figure and global personality become even more blurred. For now, the facts are clear. This was not a casual trip. It was planned, structured, and executed with precision. It involved coordinated events, targeted messaging, controlled media, and strategic timing. And whether you see that as effective or controversial depends on how you interpret those facts. And that's where this story leaves us. Because whether you see it as strategy, coincidence, or something in between, one thing is clear: this isn't over. Not even close. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this was just another trip? Or are Harry and Meghan slowly trying to step back into the royal spotlight? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everything, and these debates are getting more intense every single day. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit like. It really helps push the video out, and subscribe to Crown Clash, because I'm posting new videos every single day covering everything the mainstream media won't tell you. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, because trust me, this story is only getting bigger. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.